Let's talk about another story connected to the Labour leadership. It's been covered by BBC Online, and this is Rebecca Long-Bailey backs call to expel transphobic members. We're going to talk to Selina Todd, who is a modern history professor at Oxford University. Selina, what do you make of that pledge?
I find it very worrying. I'm against transphobia. I'm against any phobia or hatred towards any group. But one of the extraordinary things about the declaration that Rebecca Long-Bailey has signed up to is that it suggests that women should be defined as a gender rather than as a sex. They're currently defined in law, and I think most people understand the definition of women as meaning a biological sex. And the declaration suggests that we should change that to say that women should be treated as a gender, which means that anybody who wants to declare themselves as a woman should be treated as such, and that anybody who disagrees with that is transphobic and should be expelled from the Labour Party. That's not democratic. We need to have a huge debate about that very contentious issue, and this isn't the way to deal with it.
Lloyd?
Well, we need to, of course, be able to have debate, but the problem is the debate so far has been very much based around denying people's experiences and denying the oppression that many trans people suffer. They're more likely to be homeless, more likely to have mental health issues, more likely to suffer in-work poverty, and we cannot deny the situation of people. First of all, sex is not binary, one or the other. There are people with XXY chromosomes, there are people with, different variations. So first of all, that very starting basis is false, I'm afraid. And then the second basis that says, actually, what matters is what it happens to say on your DNA, rather than how you present yourself, how you live your life, how most other people see you. And it creates a very dangerous situation if you start saying, well, no, even if you look like a man, present like a man, you've got to go and use the women's changing rooms. I think most people would not be in favour of that. And so when you then are boiling down the debate to such crude principles as sometimes happens, it does mean that it enables transphobia, it enables nastiness, and that is not acceptable. So I think it's quite right to say, of course, have a debate, but here are the limits of the debate. Just like here are the limits of the debate on anti-Semitism, here are the limits of the debate on whether Israel can exist, here are the limits of the debate on transphobia and those rights. And you have to have limits, otherwise it turns into hate.
Selina?
Where are the limits in terms of the debate on women's rights? Because you've said some very contentious things there. You said that trans people are more likely to experience violence, homelessness and so on. Than whom? We have a huge amount of research. We have a huge amount of research about sex discrimination, about the need for things like single-sex spaces in order to protect vulnerable women. I agree that we need more research on the kind of discrimination that trans people face. But
so do you propose a gene test for every person to make sure that they have the right chromosome?
Yeah, let her finish and then you can come back. Yes, go on, Selina.
There is a problem here, because what this declaration suggests is that trans people's interests and rights, as advocated by a small group of activists, should be given airtime in a way that women's interests are not. There is nothing in this declaration about women being able to organise. And as for your point that somehow defining women as a sex is simplistic or outdated, the fact is that your ideas are simplistic and outdated, because if we do not define women as a sex, we define them by how they behave and how they appear. And what that is to do is to go back to restrictive gender stereotypes that suggest that women behave or appear in a certain way, and men do.
It's you that are wanting to stereotype people. It's very dangerous. It's very dangerous.
Okay,
no, biology doesn't suggest that.
Don't talk over it. Sorry, Selina. Let Selina finish her point, and then I will come back to you. Sorry, Selina, go on. What were you saying?
The science is very simple.
It's not.
Females produce large gametes, males don't. There are people who don't always conform to that. They're a very small group. They're called intersex. That is completely different from declaring oneself to be a particular gender or another. And the wider fact, which should really encourage the general population to get involved in this debate, is that there is a concerted attempt to stop people like me speaking. We've just seen it in terms of your other guest. And more widely there is an attempt, as within this declaration, to say that those of us who have researched women's rights and women's needs should not be allowed to articulate them.
All right.
Women's rights are currently enshrined in law, and all we are saying is that that law should be respected, and attempts to repeal it should be openly debated.
Lloyd.
Trying to undermine the law. At the moment, the law allows people, through a process, to change their legal sex, through a process. There is a discussion at the moment to change that process. No one is saying that tomorrow it will be that I can decide what I am one day and then decide flip the next day. No one is suggesting that. That is not a proposal. It's complete scaremongering, I'm afraid, and that's the danger, isn't it? On sensitive issues, if you scaremonger, it's very dangerous.
If someone did express that view, would it then be, under Rebecca Long-Bailey's pledge, and they're a Labour Party member, they'd be expelled?
Express what view?
If they actually express that people shouldn't be able to say one day, self-declare as a particular sex, male or female, that, you know, if they're a trans woman or a trans man, that somebody expressed that view, they'd be expelled.
Express the view that people should not be able to
should not be able to self-declare in that way from one day to the next.
There is no proposal that people should change every day.
But that's not my question. No, that's not my question. If somebody said, I'm not in favour of that happening, I'm frightened of that happening,
I think I'm not in favour of something that's not happening to happen, and they use it to whip up hate, it's a bit like saying, I'm against gay marriage because I don't want people sleeping with animals. What it does is it whips up hate, but it's a totally irrelevant point.
And they would be expelled?
Well, if they were saying, I'm against gay marriage because I don't want people sleeping with animals, well, yes, it's probably homophobic and they should be expelled.
Is not a woman, would they be expelled?
Well, if they say a trans woman is not a woman and I will never recognise that as against the law, and actually they should either have to explain themselves in great detail, and if they are unable to do that, then yes, they should look at disciplinary procedures.
And so you'll sign up to that?
Well, I think it sounds very sensible. I've not seen the detail of the pledge. I never sign up to anything until I've seen the small print.
Probably why. Oh, right. Are you worried about what might be in the small print? Sienna, is this going to be a big issue?
You know, I think it is going to be a big issue, actually. I was thinking about this, actually, before the general election campaign. It looked as if Laura Pidcock, who's a rising star in the Labour Party, and she was an MP, and people didn't actually expect her to lose her seat. And it seemed like she was going to be running for a leadership role. Now, this conversation actually kicked off a bit last week when she wrote an article for Tribune magazine, basically saying, we can't no-platform people with different views on gender and sex, and we need to have this debate, we need to have this conversation. And this is kind of what kicked off this new campaign and these pledges. I think what we don't know yet is the actual detail about these pledges, and leadership candidates might sign up to them, but what do they mean in practice, I think, is something that we don't know yet. But I mean, Keir Starmer hasn't said anything yet, and he is the front runner in the race at the moment, so we'll see what he has to say.
Right. I mean, the quote from Laura Pidcock is, the women's movement needs the space to talk about sex and gender without fear of being no-platformed. We reserve that measure for fascists. Do you agree with her?
I actually generally think that no platforming needs to be extremely restrictive in how it's used. I think that there is a danger of, not just on this issue, on general issues of no platform creep. I think
but on this issue, since
well, so I think she's therefore right that you need to have spaces where people can express views. That is different from organising public meetings where you then support the platform of a different view. You know, so no platforming originally was particularly around providing a space for fascists to be able to express their views. It wasn't even saying that you should never speak to fascists.
But
so no platforming has become abused.
Before I go back to Selina, I mean, on free speech, because there is an issue about free speech in terms of what Lloyd has just said. How far do the limits go on this particular issue? Where should they be, do you think?
I remember growing up, people would invite me to things and they'd say, oh, we'd stop the guy from the NF coming so you didn't have to face him and all the rest of that. And I'd always want to face him because if you have the courage of your convictions and you believe you're right, you have to win the argument. And when you know platform people, what you tend to do is create what I call a living martyr. You then have someone who can run around and say they won't even listen to me. So signing up to a pledge, it goes back to the comment that's been made earlier. What are the details? What do you mean? And if you're creating a space where women feel like they can't have a conversation about the trials and tribulations they're facing and what this change would make, it probably would suggest you're doing the wrong thing. You've got to leave room for everybody to be involved in a conversation.
Selina, it has triggered a bit of a storm on social media. We've seen the hashtag #ExpelMe trending. Are you wanting the other candidates for the Labour leadership not to sign a similar pledge?
Yes, and not least because, as we've heard, the kinds of pledges which are put out here have been really badly defined. You know, there is very little detail about what transphobia is meant to be. And this particular pledge suggests that Women's Place UK and the Lesbian, Gay and Bisexual Alliance are, in this pledge's words, transphobic. That's absolutely not true. One is a women's rights organisation and one advocates for lesbian, gay men's and bisexual people's rights. The fact is that this pledge completely ignores the fact that, as you've said, there's a huge debate out there, there's a lot of concern, as evidenced by Expel Me trending on Twitter and also by the Labour Women's Declaration on women's rights, which was signed by 300 founding signatories and is still gaining support within the party. So in terms of internal party democracy, which does matter because a leader who doesn't respect democracy in their party is unlikely to respect it in the wider country. Right. In terms of party democracy, this is really crucial.
All right, Selina, one activist, half an activist in every constituency in the country. It's a tiny number. And putting this debate in context, the vast majority of women that we have been polled and we seem to actually don't see this as their top issues, and it is a bit of a storm in a teacup.
All right, we're going to leave it.
18% of people want the law changed. 18%.
Selina and Lloyd, we're going to leave it there because you're not going to agree, which is clear, but we're going to leave it there because we're going to talk about Sean's campaign to be mayor. Thank you very much, Selina, for joining us.